We need to talk about something shocking happening in our courts right now. The Supreme Court just made a huge decision about police and excessive force, and they all agreed, 9-0. That almost never happens. But here's the crazy part. A lower court might be completely ignoring what they said, and this case could be heading right back to the Supreme Court in just months. Let me break down what's going on, because this affects all of us. Let's go back to where this all began. Picture this. A regular traffic stop in Houston, Texas. A police officer named Roberto Felix Jr. pulls over a young man named Ashton Barnes. Why? Some toll violations. Nothing major, just some cameras that caught his license plate going through toll booths without paying. It might have even been a rental car situation. Officer Felix walks up to the car and tells Barnes to get out. Barnes opens his door like he's going to step out, but then he makes a terrible decision. He tries to drive away instead. Now, what happens next is where everything goes wrong. Officer Felix makes his own bad decision. Instead of letting the car go and calling for backup, he jumps onto the side of the moving vehicle. He's literally hanging on to a car that's trying to drive away. Then, while clinging to this fleeing car, Officer Felix pulls out his gun and shoots Ashton Barnes twice. Barnes dies right there at the scene. Think about that for a moment. A traffic stop for unpaid tolls ends with a young man dead. Barnes's mother was devastated. She did what any parent would do. She sued the officer. She argued that shooting her son was excessive force and violated his Fourth Amendment rights. The Fourth Amendment is supposed to protect us from unreasonable actions by the government, including police using too much force. But here's where things get really interesting and frustrating. The case goes to district court first. That judge says the officer did nothing wrong. They use something called the moment of threat rule. This rule says you only look at the exact moment the officer pulled the trigger. Was he in danger right then? If yes, the shooting is justified. End of story. Everything that happened before that moment doesn't matter. The fact that the officer jumped onto a moving car? Irrelevant. The fact that this was just a toll violation? Not important. The mother appeals to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. They agree with the district court. Same rule, same result. The officer is protected. But Barnes's mother doesn't give up. She takes it all the way to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land. And this is where things get really important. The Supreme Court doesn't just rule in her favor. All 9 justices, conservative and liberal, all of them, say the Fifth Circuit got it wrong. Unanimously. That's incredibly rare. The Supreme Court says you can't just look at one frozen moment in time. You have to look at the totality of circumstances. That's a legal term that means everything that happened before, during, and after. The whole picture. Justice after justice agrees. You need to ask how a reasonable police officer would have acted given everything that happened. Not just that split second, but the choices that led up to it. The Supreme Court explains it clearly. Earlier events matter. They help us understand why an officer might see something as threatening or harmless. You can't ignore that an officer created a dangerous situation by jumping on a moving car. This makes total sense, right? Context matters. If I create a dangerous situation, I can't then claim I had to use deadly force because of the danger I created. The Supreme Court sends the case back down to the Fifth Circuit with clear instructions. Look at everything, not just one moment. Apply the totality of circumstances test. Now here's where this story takes a wild turn. The Fifth Circuit gets the case back. They have clear instructions from the Supreme Court. So what do? They don't hold new oral arguments. They don't ask the lawyers to submit new briefs explaining how the case looks under this new standard. They just decide it themselves, really quickly. And incredibly, they rule the same way. Even looking at everything that happened, they say the officer's actions were fine. Their reasoning? Anytime someone flees in a vehicle, that creates a deadly threat. Therefore, Officer Felix was reasonable in using lethal force to prevent a dangerous chase. Wait, what? Let's think about what they just said. They're essentially saying that if someone drives away from a traffic stop, police can shoot them. For toll violations. For a broken taillight. For anything. That doesn't sound like looking at the totality of circumstances. That sounds like a blanket rule. Exactly what the Supreme Court said not to do. Here's something that makes this even more bizarre. Earlier in this case, one of the Fifth Circuit judges, Judge Higginbottom, wrote something important. He said if they had to use the totality of circumstances approach, the officer would lose. The deadly force would be unconstitutional. But now, after the Supreme Court tells them to use exactly that approach, somehow the officer wins? The same analysis that Judge Higginbottom said would mean the officer violated Barnes's rights now somehow protects the officer. How does that make sense? Barnes's lawyers see what's happening. They file for what's called an en banc review. That means they want all the judges on the Fifth Circuit, not just the three-judge panel, to look at this case. They argue that this new ruling creates a dangerous rule. Police can shoot any fleeing driver, even during minor traffic stops. They point out this contradicts Supreme Court precedent and even the Fifth Circuit's own previous cases that say fleeing in a vehicle doesn't automatically justify killing someone. But the Fifth Circuit denies the request. Fast. No debate. No discussion. The full court won't even look at it. On December 21st, the Fifth Circuit officially closes the case. They issue their mandate, which basically means we're done here. Now Barnes's family has until February to decide if they want to take this back to the Supreme Court. Again, think about that timeline. The Supreme Court ruled on this case just 6 or 7 months ago. They gave crystal clear instructions. And now it might be heading right back to them because a lower court seemingly ignored what they said. This almost never happens. Courts don't usually defy the Supreme Court this quickly or this obviously. You might be thinking, why should I care about some legal case? Here's why. This case determines when police can use deadly force against you, your family, your friends. It sets the rules for how much force is reasonable during a traffic stop. If the Fifth Circuit's approach wins, it means police can shoot fleeing drivers in many situations, even for minor offenses, even when officers create dangerous situations themselves. The Supreme Court tried to say that context matters. Your actions matter, but so do the officer's actions leading up to the shooting. You can't ignore that an officer jumped onto a moving car and then claimed he feared for his life. But if lower courts can just ignore that, what was the point of the Supreme Court ruling? This case shows a tension in our system. The Supreme Court speaks with one voice. All 9 justices agreed. But lower courts still have enormous power in how they apply those rulings. The Fifth Circuit covers Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. Their decisions affect millions of people. When they interpret constitutional rights like the Fourth Amendment, those interpretations become the law for everyone in those states. And right now, they're interpreting the Fourth Amendment in a way that the Supreme Court seems to have rejected. We're watching this case closely. Barnes's family has until February to decide their next move. If they petition the Supreme Court again, will the court take the case? Will they be even more explicit about what they mean? Or will they let the Fifth Circuit's decision stand, effectively giving lower courts permission to narrow Supreme Court rulings? This is about more than one case. It's about whether courts protect our constitutional rights or find ways around them. It's about whether police can use deadly force just because someone drives away during a traffic stop. It's about whether the highest court's word actually means something. So we'll keep watching. We'll keep reporting. And we'll see if the Supreme Court has to step in again to make sure their ruling actually gets followed. Because at the end of the day, this nation was built on rights and the rule of law. And those principles are only as strong as courts' willingness to enforce them, even when it's difficult, even when it protects people who made mistakes, and even when it means holding officers accountable for the situations they create. Stay tuned. This story is far from over.